welcome back to the 15-Minute Fantasy Writer. I am author and writing coach Autumn Burt, the creator of this video series and the Am Writing Fantasy blog. So, today's lesson, we're going to jump into world building. We're going to do a little video series to cover some tips and tricks to really get you going, because especially as a new writer, a novice writer, it can feel like world building takes forever before you actually get a chance to start writing. And it's so important because readers really are expecting an amazing background to your story. That is what has been set. It is the bar you have to cross. And I have to admit, and sometimes as a novice writer, sometimes world building happens after the fact. You have a great story, you start writing it, and maybe you think afterwards, oh, you know what? I really didn't consider this well, when you're halfway into the story. Well, we're going to show you how to set up world building without taking forever, how to jump right in as well, and how it's going to actually affect your plot. So let's go ahead and get started with the slides, because we need to get you writing. Okay, welcome to this edition of the 15-Minute Fantasy Writer, where we're going to start with a world building series, and we're going to look today at, in this video, just at the first step. So really, a realistic but magical world is a key component to fantasy novels. This is what readers have come to expect. It is a hallmark of the genre. This is what, is the bar that you should be crossing. You should accept that when you write a fantasy novel, you're going to be creating a very in-depth world that feels real, that you could just open a door and step into it. That's what the readers want to experience, and that takes a lot of work. So we're going to set that up and start you with the first step that'll get you going in creating a world. So like I said, readers expect a fantastic and immersive world with characters that feel like they grew up in that setting, and that is part of it. The old idea, I know I read a few novels like this when I was very young, that, the character doesn't even know their way around, and that's how you introduce the reader to the world. That doesn't work anymore. It should feel like the characters grew up there. It wouldn't be the same if we looked at Sansa, we looked at Game of Thrones, and they didn't know their way around or who the king was or any river run castle. It has to feel like the characters grew up there. And developing that level of background and backdrop can take as long as writing the novel. Seriously. I mean, if you're a fast writer, definitely, because if you're writing a novel in 2 months, yeah, it could be 2 months of world building. But literally, for your first novel, it can take a year to world build. If you really get into it, if you really enjoy it, and, well, that is part of the reason, actually, that writing a series is such a good idea, because you spend all that time developing this world. So it's great to be able to reuse all that information. That's why, so many people do set their stories in the same world, even if it's a different characters, because they've already developed it. It's a good tip for a novelist. But you also don't have to take a year to world build, even to create something unique that is you, that is so part of your world, your story. And I will even explain why it's better to start with the world before you start writing, because that is how you make it feel so immersive and like the characters really grew up in this setting. So let's go ahead and start looking at it. Like I said, there are steps that'll help you build an amazing world faster. And that's what this is all about. We want to get you to writing, but we also don't want you to have an end product that you are not proud of, that readers will not love, that it doesn't meet the expectations. So, and instead of wandering around and creating on the fly, I partially a pantser, I write, I have an outline when I write, just an idea of what's going to happen, but there are still things unexpected. However, one of them shouldn't be the core components of the world. You need to figure out, because if you're doing it on the fly, you're not going to create quite a nuanced world. It's not going to feel as deep, and you're also not going to have some elements that really come up into the plot just because you took the time to world build first. And like I said, doing it on the fly often leads to fixing earlier parts of the novel. That means a lot of heavy editing. So that, we want to avoid that too. We want to try to make this whole process not seamless, but at least get it going, make it take time, have less flaws so that you have to spend less time fixing them. Or, like I said, we're spending months creating the world to only use 20% in the story, and that's another big thing. A lot of writers actually find out they love world building. I mean, we're often fantasy writers because we fell in love with fantasy novels and these worlds, and when you get into creating your own, you can become addicted. It's so easy, and I understand. But the worst part is when you spend all this time creating characters and places and backstory and history, and then 20%, less than that, makes it into the novel. Maybe you'll use it in another novel, but if you're not going to use it, maybe you don't need to get into it quite that much, so you have to learn to cut yourself off too. So this series is really, we're going to delve into how to world build, to tackle the most important areas that are going to be part of your novel. And it's going to help you focus on what is important and then get you writing. And really, in the end, world building is fun, creating this great world. That's so fantastic. But the important thing is that story you want to write, that you want to get out to readers. So remember, that is the real goal in world building, is to get to writing. So let's go ahead and begin with world building step 1. So, before you develop your hero's hometown, there's a step that comes before that. Before you even create governments or castles or kingdoms, there's actually a step before any of that. So the absolute first thing to get you started in world building is actually, you're going to like this. It's something you've already started but didn't realize that you're already cluing into. And that is defining the era of the story. And so what do we mean by that? Well, era is a distinct period of time with a defining feature by definition. So if you think of eras, you can say like the Industrial Revolution is an era. The medieval period, those are eras known in the world history of Earth. So you're going to start with that era, not of your world, which will be, something you should think about defining when you create the history, but that's ahead of us right yet. What we want to look at is the equivalent of the era in our history. And the reason is really simple, because like it or not, all stories begin with a kernel of familiarity. I mean, it's written in English or whatever language you're writing in, which is something known on Earth. You're not describing everything new, the colors, trees. Most likely there is something that's relatable to our world, and one of those relatable things is actually the background setting or the era of the novel. So why is that? Why is this important? Well, readers will make a subconscious connection to how things work in the world of your story based on features that are similar to our history, the things that they learned about in school or that they're interested in. So think of it this way. If they're reading about something with castles and knights, even if it isn't medieval Europe, they're going to equate that story with medieval Europe. They're going to expect medieval European things. Or if you're mentioning pyramids and deserts and a really big river that floods, they're going to think about ancient Egypt. You should know that. That's just the way we're programmed because this is the world we grew up in. And so even if you alter things, even if it's set in another planet, those are the ideas that are going to surface in a reader's mind when they read about these things. And that is important because what you want to do is you want to control those associations and connections. So you're going to choose the era and the distinctive elements that you will use, alter, or leave out purposefully. And that's kind of the key. You want to be in control of this. So if you started thinking about your main character or the idea you currently have, and especially if you watched the previous one on developing a story idea. So you should have a kernel idea that you've been playing with. This is the story you're gonna write. So look at that and ask yourself, what time period in Earth history, present, future, past, is it similar to? Think about that, and that should help you in so many ways as you begin to develop your world. So first you want to start off is make a list of the common presumptions about that time period. Are there flying cars? Men dressed in togas? Is it a strict religious society? What is going on in that time period that when you hear medieval Europe, if you hear Inca or Maya, what are the things that are going on that immediately come to mind? And from that list, write down everything you think of. Decide which elements you want to use in your story and which you're going to purposefully alter. Because remember, those are the associations readers will come up with. It might be subconscious, but they really will be in the back of a reader's mind. And make sure if you have big changes, you're going to have something totally different. You want to make sure those are the ones you clarify early in your novel so the readers are not confused or lost as they're reading. If you have crystal magic or something that looks like electricity but it's something totally different in medieval Europe, You want to make sure that is there right from the beginning so that halfway through the novel the readers aren't going, how did they just flip a switch and get lights? That doesn't make sense. You want it to be a part of the world, and you want to know that the reader is going to stumble on that so you can ease them into it a lot sooner. Another thing you want to look at is, and this is a really cool thing about defining the era, is what ideas does the time period give you for developing your world? You suddenly opened up a resource book. So does it provide a landscape, maybe a religion, type of buildings, or a method of transportation you hadn't considered? I know when I was writing my first fantasy novel, I was looking mostly at sailing, but that was maybe something I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't thought in Mediterranean kind of times, ancient Greece. I had to throw in eventually horses and camels, but they really were an afterthought because my world was water-based. Start fleshing out those elements that fit the time period and your story. And even if you want to tweak it, have something a little different, you can have airships. That's fine, even if it didn't exist back then, but make sure you start layering in the plausibility of that early on, because the readers are going to go, how? How did that work out? Make sure you have it there. Answer the question before they ask it. But don't forget, okay, we've been talking about Earth, true, but this is now where we're going to start leaving behind Earth history. Your world is going to have magic, strange beasts, and different people. That's fantastic. That's what the readers want. It is fantasy. The era simply sets up the unconscious associations that we develop. We're going to control those. So knowing those associations helps you control which ones you want to use and what to change and how to do it so that the reader isn't knocked over the head and falls out of the story going, what? What happened? So, like I said, knowing those associations also has another powerful element. It's going to help you with descriptions. So you might be able to visualize elements better if you're talking about ancient Egypt. Suddenly you can go Google some pictures, look at the pyramids, look at the architecture, and you'll have a better and more rich description because you're not coming up with it all on your own. There's amazing resources out there that will help inspire you, even if you change them, and definitely should because it's your story, right? So you can research what was common on Earth for ideas. I love the Inca society. I have yet to use it in a novel, but I love their principles. I love how they're created and how they believe truth. So I would use that somewhere, and I'd probably look at their society in other ways to find things that I can use for a background and other ways I can describe them. And readers will expect certain elements, so you won't have to spend pages describing something characteristic of that time period on Earth. So if you're talking about something with castles, most readers who are maybe a fan of medieval Europe should understand what a castle is. They should understand what a pyramid is. It's not going to take pages of description to get them to understand what you're trying to say because it all fits together already in their minds. And stay tuned for the second step. There's something coming up that'll be really helpful. But if you want to jump ahead, check out my free downloadable Ultimate Fantasy Writers World Building Cheat Sheet. And that is at www.ultimatefantasywritersguide.com. But that is for step 1. You know where to go from here. So go ahead, take a look, and start building your world. Define the era and start looking at those associations. How you're going to tweak them, which ones you're going to use, what you're going to leave out, and how you're going to go about doing that. And don't forget to stop by the Am Writing Fantasy blog to find more writing tips, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there.